If we just get a Christian prince, all of our problems will be solved. That's what we have heard in recent days in the Christian world. There's been a very lively conversation about Christian nationalism that I've engaged, others have engaged, and it's a very worthy subject. In fact, the question of church and state and how the church engages and interfaces with the state is not in any way a new question. And the idea that there should be some kind of strong linkage between church and state, such that there is a Christian nation in view in a place like America, is not in any way a new idea. Since the Protestant Reformation, in fact, Christians in the Protestant tradition have thought a ton about this and have come up with a range of ideas and options and positions. If you go back well before the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, you'll know that there was largely a fusion of church and state that prevailed, for example, in Europe in the Catholic situation. So this is not a new question. There are new kinds of solutions and proposals being offered today, again, under the banner of Christian nationalism. And that debate has waxed hot and it has been calmer. And there's a lot that people have tried to sort out. And I myself have dipped my oar in at different points. And we've talked about this on this very humble little podcast. Today, in our summer series, I'm in another recording location that I cannot disclose to you, or else I would have to send agents after you. Today, we're going to consider a fresh angle of the discussion surrounding Christian nationalism today. And it's going to be a little bit biblical, but more historical. We're going to talk about the 30 Years' War of Europe in the 17th century. Now, that is not something that people have given a lot of attention to. I haven't seen barely anybody on social media, for example, reference the 30 Years' War, the wars of religion, as they're sometimes called. There's a prior major conflict between states that involves Christian religion in roughly the 1330s to the 1450s in Europe. Suffice it to say that Europe has been racked by religious conflict over the centuries numerous times. I want to talk about the 30 Years' War between 1618 to 1648. And here is my thesis for this episode. When you study the 30 Years' War, you see that this proposal to wed the church and the state in a Christian nation is A, not new, and B, at least in some cases, has not gone well at all. That won't settle the whole debate, and I'm not coming in acrimony or heat, but I am trying to bring light to the debate and make you think a little bit, whichever side you're on, with a predominantly historical perspective today. Welcome to Grace and Truth, by the way. My name is Owen Strachan. I'll be your host. Please subscribe to and review this podcast on all relevant platforms. Thanks for hanging with us through the summer months. My producer, Misty, has been great working with me in a range of locales. We're avidly seeking a stable office location and hoping and praying for one. So you can pray for me there that I will, in fact, find a place. I'm a little bit living a pilgrim podcast life. And so I'm trusting in the Lord and have some good ideas on offer. So hoping that the summer series transitions into a more stable post-summer series with a stable office location. That's enough prologue. We need to talk a little bit about the wars of religion, the 30 Years' War, again, in Europe between 1618 and 1648. Sometimes when you talk about church history, very quickly, by the way, or history more broadly, adults' eyes glaze over as if history was something that you were only supposed to focus on when you were in high school or grammar school, something like that. But now you don't really have to think about these things. For Christians, history is not the primary formative influence in our theology and our spirituality. It's not. But history is definitely a factor, and history is definitely a witness, and history definitely has truths to teach us that we want to glean. We want to hear from the wisdom of the past. There's a ton of wisdom in the past, and so we as believers fundamentally in this 21st century context want to have an open ear to the past. It's not that the church's history, it's not that historical theology, again, is itself inerrant or tells us everything we need to know about faith and practice. But it is that we are not those who ignore history or pretend that history has not existed. As Christians, as born-again believers, we want to very much learn from whoever we can learn from and glean wisdom from whoever we can glean it from. And so we want to learn from, yes, this little pocket of time that actually gives us a great window, I believe, into what happens when the church effectively picks up the sword, and the church seeks to wed itself to the state and advance the spiritual kingdom by the sword. In sum, it doesn't work. In the early 1600s, as we pick up the thread then, we have to talk about the Holy Roman Empire, which has been around for a long time and was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. That's a bad history joke, by the way. It was really a loose confederation of states in the European context, and there are shifting loyalties between Catholicism and Protestantism. There's effectively a Cold War as we pick up the story in the early 17th century between the Protestant Union and the Catholic League. There are armies that both the Protestant Union and the Catholic League amass in the early 17th century because they sense that a war is brewing and is coming. And this tends to happen in history. There's, a building tension that lots of different people in lots of different places are feeling. And then there is one event, often a kind of strange event, that ends up kicking the whole conflagration off. In this case, there is a single event that happens that's kind of just an unfortunate, almost silly event, but it ends up sparking, as I am trying to say, a war that lasts for 30 long years. Now, think about that just for a minute before we go further in our 17th century narrative. We, in our lifetime, those of us who have been alive for, let's say, 30 years or so, we've lived through the Iraq War, which spilled over into the Afghanistan War. And so we've known war for, half decade or so. Those who experienced Vietnam knew that conflict went on for almost a decade, really 5 to 10 years. World War II for America was roughly 4 years long, as was World War I. Of course, those conflicts were longer for other parties. But suffice it to say that we think of a long war as, 6 to 8 years. That's interminable, especially with a press that is hostile to the very idea of war, and that is very hostile to war when, let's say, conservative or Republican presidents are prosecuting whether it should be prosecuted or not. It is an almost unbearable experience to live through a war and then be a hostile media commenting on that war and criticizing it ad nauseum. It really is incredible to live in the age of digital media and new media and social media when you don't just have issues to deal with, you have the chattering class endlessly critiquing them, turning them over, making small things, big things, so on and so forth. I'm not saying the media has no role to play. Of course, I am saying these wars tend to feel longer than they already are simply because of the fact that we're always talking about them and always watching news coverage of them, as we are with global events or national events or even local events more broadly today. A 6-year war feels interminable for us. Imagine a 30 years war, 30 years of conflict in Europe between many different countries, many different principalities. That's what happened. It all kicked off in 1618 in the present-day Czech Republic, what was then called Bohemia. There were about 2 million people in Bohemia. The majority were Protestant, but they had Catholic rulership in the country, and that was a simmering pot of resentment in action. In 1618, there were leaders of the Bohemian Protestants who, in this strange event, threw a couple priests and a secretary, Catholics that is, out the window of a tower into a pile of manure. It was a major insult to the Catholic leadership of Bohemia, present-day Czech Republic. The Bohemians used this occasion to plan a revolt, and the entire European continent divided in support either of the Protestant Bohemians or the Catholic Habsburgs, who were largely ruling numerous states in Europe in this time. And what happens is indeed that a war kicks off in 1618, and the Protestants get consistently beaten back by the Catholics. Bohemians then were forced, Czech Republic citizens, we would say today, to either become Catholic or get expelled from the state. So you had to be Catholic. You were called to be forcibly Catholic. Hey, let me jump out of this discussion for just a second and inform you of something that's pretty important for you to consider. Economists are warning us about massive tax hikes that could hit your IRA and your 401k hard. It's hard to say these words, isn't it? With inflation rising and global uncertainty, it's no wonder central banks and many Americans are turning to gold. Proverbs 21:20 reminds us to preserve what we've built. If you haven't considered gold yet, Now's the time. Reach out to Priority Gold to see how they can help you diversify with physical gold and silver. Text GOLDEN to 800-405-GOLD for a free gold info guide and see if you qualify for free shipping and storage. Don't wait. Get your portfolio working for you while the market is golden. Text GOLDEN to 800-405-GOLD to learn more. That's text GOLDEN to 800-405-GOLD. Now let's jump back into our conversation. England at this time, though a major power in general, did not enter the war in support of Protestant Bohemia. In the 1620s and 1630s, a whole bunch more Protestant nations joined the Bohemians as the Bohemians seek religious liberty. The major Catholic army, gets defeated in 1631, and the conflict spirals. And here's what happens in the 1630s in Europe, a decade that very few people talk about in our broader society today, but an important one. There are whole cities that are torched. There are many peasants that are tortured. Soldiers get tortured when captured by peasants. Peasants get captured and murdered and tortured by soldiers. The war becomes about political power. Religion is very much in the mix as a kind of rallying cry and political identity. Now, please note this point very importantly. Yes, I am turning my podcast into a church history seminary classroom or university classroom, but I'm doing so because we need to think historically. Religion is the pretext. It's all about Protestantism and the cause of Protestantism, or Catholicism and the cause of Catholicism. But I want you to understand that this is what happens when you merge the church with the state. And you do so even to the degree that you see the state as advancing the interests and the cause of the church by the sword. It doesn't work. And what happens is not that you get this glorious revival of true gospel religion when let's say, Protestant state, coming from my Protestant background, defeats the Catholics. It's not that then the gospel triumphed. In 17th century Europe, it typically was the case that Protestantism was, again, the rallying banner of a given society or country, but there was nothing of true gospel religion, at least in the battle and in the conquest. And so what ended up happening was a whole lot of religious violence that supposedly was advancing good interests, but wasn't doing a whole lot of good for anyone. Suffice it to say that in 1648, there is a series of agreements that is collectively called the Peace of Westphalia that officially ends the 30 Years' War. What happens in consequence is that the Holy Roman Empire is effectively ended. There are all these independent nations that are created. State sovereignty is emphasized. Catholic stronghold in terms of European control is ended. And so the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 is basically considered by many historians and practitioners of political philosophy as the birth of the modern state. Yet you don't hear much about the Peace of Westphalia, but 1648 is often traced as a very crucial time in the development, even the birth of the modern state. The Pope loses power to manipulate secular rulers through the 30 Years' War. There is now the reality that the state is more powerful than the church throughout Europe. Entire regions and countries are devastated by the 30 Years' War. Armies were raised by both Protestants and Catholics that would roam territories and often do so without close supervision or justice enacted. And so there are all sorts of instances of violence against civilian populations. Terrible things happen over the course of the 30 Years' War as a result of these mercenary forces, effectively. And there's just a whole lot of political and religious confusion that dominates the 17th century. Why talk all through this? Because it's very important for us to think through in a number of ways. And here are 4 reflections on the 17th century 30 Years' War, again, between 1618 and 1648. Yes, there's going to be a quiz after this podcast. Again, bad professor joke there. Four consequences. First, the wars of religion had a major effect on Europe. You don't hear them talked about today, but the wars of religion help in a huge way to advance civilian interest in the Enlightenment in the 18th century and following. Why? Well, for a very good and understandable reason. Lots of people in Europe came to identify both Protestantism and Catholicism as predominantly political realities. So you became a Protestant, at least in a lot of cases in this time period, in order to battle back the Catholics. And it's very likely that lots of people did genuinely find that their sympathies lay with either the Protestant cause or the Catholic cause. I'm not divorcing political citizenship from genuine religious convictions. But what happened is that a lot of people did not possess the ability in the aftermath of this conflict to dissociate true religion, true gospel faith that had just been recovered in the prior century in Europe, in the 16th century, from political religion that wasn't really heart religion, but was more establishment religion, religion as the flag under which you marched. And that had a major effect in terms of causing people to be disenchanted with regard to Christian faith. People saw religion as a political club, religion as a sword that advanced the causes of certain people and killed and tortured and subjugated others. And that helped many people embrace Enlightenment philosophy, Enlightenment tolerance, the sovereignty of the self as a philosophical movement that plays out in the 18th and 19th centuries throughout Europe. There is a ton of disillusionment that creeps all across Europe as a result of the 30 Years' War, when the state and the church were wedded and the interests of the religious state were supposedly advanced by the sword. I'm not saying there were no positive consequences. There definitely were some positive consequences and outcomes of the 30 Years' War, but there were also many negative consequences. So we've got to know that in terms of evaluating the claim that a golden dawn will arrive if we can just regain Christian nationalism. This is an era of Christian nationalism. This is an era when there are Christian princes. This is a time when the prince's religion is basically that which sets the tone for the people's religion. Whatever religion the prince has, the people have, whether Protestant or Catholic. And so you had the opportunity in the 17th century to have the kind of Christian prince, Christian magistrate that people are so desiring today in 2024. We understand why people are desiring that. We don't mock that desire or belittle it, because it is fundamentally right for Christians to want justice and good governance and good rulership and peace to prevail on the earth, and for folks to live in a righteous way. Those are all good instincts, but you have to seek those ends and those goods in the right way, and you definitely have to do so in a chastened way in this world, in this age, because things are very much fallen. And we, by the way, have a hard enough time keeping the church Christian, let alone the state Christian, when we have no mandate to make the state explicitly Christian. That is not our mission as Christians. There's no New Testament passage that would call us to make the state Christian or to think that we can. Second reflection on the 30 Years' War. These events helped create the context for the American experiment. It's partly the 30 Years' War and the lack of religious liberty and the lack of a good form of tolerance. There's a bad form of tolerance, postmodern tolerance, that Christians cannot and should not support. And then there's a positive form of tolerance where we all accept that we're not going to kill each other based on what religion we are. So I just want to make this very clear. I'm going to repeat it because there is so much confusion sown in the church today on this particular issue. People think that tolerance is bad in and of itself. And what I want to be very clear about, again, to repeat, at pains or danger of being pedantic, is that there is bad tolerance, and there's a whole lot of that in the 21st century, where you don't abide by the truth, you don't think there's truth at all, everybody just lives by their own truth, and everybody tolerates each other accordingly. That is bad tolerance. There is a ton of that. You and I should reject that. But then there is a good form of tolerance where, again, there's a lot to say about this principled tolerance, ordered tolerance, that I think the New Testament would support in the right form. And it leads to us not killing each other based on what religion we are, as happened in Europe in centuries past, including not that long ago, some 400 years ago in the 30 Years' War. People would kill each other simply for being Protestant or simply for being Catholic. Some people out there, I'm guessing with some certainty, want that context to prevail. And that is not a good reality in my mind. They may have reasons for arriving at that conclusion. They may go to Scripture to ground those convictions. I don't think they're reading Scripture rightly. I don't want the revival of a context where people kill each other based on what religion they are. That is, then, I'm saying, good tolerance. We want that form of tolerance extended. And I would caution you against those who would try to gin you up into a warlike state where you would think it is a good thing to again have tribal wars of religion as we really have had in past centuries in the West. America, the American colonies, are enabled to exist in part because lots of people who have the 30 Years' War and other conflicts in the rearview mirror see that it just might be a good thing to have some religious liberty. And there's a lot to say about the American experiment. There's a lot to say about the 13 different colonies and their different religions and approaches to church and state. So let that be said, this is a massive subject, but fundamentally, part of why, you need to understand this, we can boil this down, part of why there is religious liberty in America is because of events like the 30 Years' War. And that is not then a bad result in my book. There are negative developments of the 30 Years' War, absolutely. This is a positive development. It is a good thing then that the 17th century form of Christian nationalism did not prevail in America. It is good. I'm really glad that I'm not being conscripted to go into war this very month, July 2024, to kill Catholics or to kill Jews or to kill Muslims in this particular era. I'm really glad I don't have to do that. I'm glad my son, as he gets older and older, you're not taking my daughters to war, by the way. They're not going to war under any circumstances. But I'm very glad for my son to not have to go defend some kind of Protestant nation against a Catholic nation. Again, I'm really glad for what was developed in America. And that's really important because, thirdly, these conflicts show us the goodness of what we call religious liberty. This is the goodness of religious liberty. At the very heart of our democracy lies a principle we hold sacred: free speech. It's the cornerstone that supports every freedom we cherish. Yet in today's digital age, discussions about our wealth, our rights, and our future are being silenced or overshadowed in mainstream narratives. This leaves many feeling voiceless in conversations that are crucial to our financial independence and security. This is where Wealth Protection Research steps in, armed with a mission that's never been more critical. Wealth Protection Research is not a financial advisory firm. They're defenders of free speech, committed to giving a voice to the silenced. Wealth Protection Research tirelessly seeks out financial experts. These are the voices that challenge prevailing narratives, especially as we navigate the uncertainties of the 2024 election. Wealth Protection Research has created a 2024 Wealth Protection Report. This free report highlights the 3 best ideas for protecting and growing your money heading into the 2024 election. It contains ideas the mainstream media won't touch, and listeners can get it completely free. Text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy. If you believe in the sanctity of free speech, as I, Owen Strachan, absolutely do, and the importance of financial freedom, then act now. Text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy of this 2024 Election Protection Report. It's time to widen the scope of what we're told, to hear the ideas the establishment does not think you can handle, and to take control of our financial destinies. Again, text IDEAS to 76626 to claim your free copy. Support free speech. In Christian circles today, those who support religious liberty, like I very much do, have been said to promote the post-war liberal consensus. That is the phrase that Stephen Wolfe and others have used on the Christian nationalist side to very much critique those who would support religious liberty, as if religious liberty as a good really basically debuted about 60, 70, 80 years ago and is this new liberal idea and is a bad idea that the liberals dreamed up because they really do want to support postmodern tolerance. And weak-kneed evangelicals like me, Anabaptists like me, pietists like me have wide-eyed embraced in a very Pollyanna-ish way the post-war liberal consensus. And that's just not a sound historical approach at all. And this is why, though I respect his mind, I do have very serious concerns about Stephen Wolfe's treatment of history in his book on Christian nationalism, The Case for Christian Nationalism. He doesn't offer a survey of religious history in the West, for example, over the last 500 years. He picks and chooses. He parachutes in and out. He finds some thinkers in the Reformed tradition, including Calvin, that he likes, and he quotes them in places, and in some cases talks about their thought, even talks about a few events here and there. But if you're going to make the case for the magisterial reformational vision of the wedding of church and state in some form, if you're really making a strong case, an academic, scholarly case in the best Christian form, what you have to do is you have to survey history, and you have to show that not everything, by the way, supports your view. You have to show what supports your view, what doesn't, how views developed, why there are some people who don't agree with your position, what different positions there are, why those different positions make the case they make, and then absolutely you are free to show from your judgment why you think your case is the best one. But if you do that kind of work, which is the established scholarly standard, then you show that you're committed to fairness and you're committed to thinking through, again, the strengths and weaknesses, the ups and downs, the warp and woof of your position. And that actually strengthens your case because you show that you have a grasp of the period and you can reckon with the period overall and make sense of it. But Wolfe does not offer any such survey. You see, here's what I'm stating. Here's the case I'm making. It's not the post-war liberal consensus that seeded the ground for a strong doctrine of religious liberty that ends up prevailing, thankfully, in my judgment, in America. It's these events. It's all sorts of pre-reformational, reformational, and post-reformational events that cause Christians in both the magisterial camp and the non-magisterial camp, the free church camp, to over time develop a doctrine of church and state that learns from catastrophic events like the 30 Years' War. And yes, there's Enlightenment philosophy and secular philosophy and unsound visions of tolerance and the state that are mixed into Western political philosophy of the last 400 years. There absolutely are. So it's not all good. And I in no way am making that case. But I actually do believe that it is a positive historical development that people don't kill each other because one side is Protestant, the other side is Catholic. In America, what prevails over the long haul due to events and developments of the 17th, 18th, 19th century is a vision of religious liberty where in America, you can ply your religious trade, you can have your group, you can have your views, and you are free to enter the religious marketplace in general terms here. And I am really glad for that. And I would commend that to you for all sorts of reasons. But I think in some, when you study the 17th century 30 Years' War, you end up thankful that in America, we're not rerunning that program at this time, at least. Could happen again. But I'm really thankful that we're not currently, as evangelicals, at least the huge majority of us, looking to the rise of a Christian prince to solve the very real civilizational issues we have in America. America is in an endangered place right now, to be sure. I understand why people are drawn to Christian nationalism for that reason as well. It's understandable. It's even right to want justice and order to prevail, to want Christian influence to be all throughout the society. I just don't think this is the play to run. I don't think you want to say, well, if we can get a Christian prince and he'll then lead the country in a strong way and make it even militantly Christian, even willing to do battle with those who would oppose true Christianity, and not every Christian nationalist thinker says this, but some do, then we're going to have the Golden Dawn, and we're not going to have the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn only comes when Christ comes back and makes everything right. And this leads to my fourth and final reflection very briefly. Jesus' kingdom is not of this world, then and now. Jesus' kingdom is not of this world. Jesus, the true Christian king, does not advance his kingdom by the sword. John's gospel brings that out in two places. First, Peter cuts off the ear of the servant of the high priest when a huge force comes to arrest Jesus prior to his crucifixion in John 18, and Jesus undoes what Peter does and heals the ear of the man who was just injured. And so Jesus makes very clear that his disciples are not to pick up the sword in defending him and promoting his teaching and his kingdom and his gospel. His kingdom is not going to advance by the sword. I'm not saying here that it is wrong for us to have defined nations. I'm not saying that nations should fail to have borders. I'm not saying that it is wrong in all cases for nations to go to war and Christians who are citizens of those nations to go to war. I'm not saying it's wrong to practice self-defense in the context of the home, for example. There's a range of qualifications to make here that are good and important biblical qualifications. Jesus' own followers, according to Luke 11, carried a couple swords. Much to say there. I am saying, though, that in terms of the kingdom of Christ, I'm not talking about the preservation of civilizations or the defense of a home or something like that. I'm talking about how Christ's true kingdom, not anything that is Christian in name, how the true kingdom, the kingdom of Christ's gospel advances. And I am here to say the kingdom of Christ does not advance by the sword. This is what Jesus says in John 18:36. My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. The exact point I just tried to make, but my kingdom is not of this world. We need to hear that and believe that and practice that today. The 30 Years' War reminds us how bad it is when we ignore or disdain or reject what Jesus said in John 18:36 and think that we can advance the gospel and the kingdom of Christ itself through the sword. Nations sometimes have to go to war, and there can be effects for the church from those wars. Let that be said. Yes, religious liberty can prevail in a territory that now is defeated. So there can be even civilizational good and even spiritual good that comes from wars. But fundamentally, we're not called to start up a new work and replace the missions program with the conquest program. That's not our fundamental calling. Our calling is a proclamational calling. It's to preach the gospel. It's to see churches built by the Spirit of God. It's to live out the Christian faith. It's to be meaningfully Christian. Christ's kingdom is not of this world. Let's remember that when we consider these serious conversations about Christian nationalism, about church and state, and about the fate of the church in these strange and evil days. The good news is, again, that Jesus' kingdom is not of this world. This isn't bad news for us. This isn't disheartening news. This is the most encouraging news we can hear. The kingdom is advancing. The gospel is being proclaimed. Disciples are being made. Trust in your great God that the fate of the world is not in our hands or the hands of the Christian prince, whoever he might be. The fate of the world is in the hands of King Jesus. He will not fail us. God bless you.